Hey everybody, so today we're talking about that. Stick around. Hey everyone, okay, so today we're talking about the book At War, written by Andrew Pettegree, subtitled How Reading Shaped Conflict and Conflict Shaped Reading. Published this, 2023. It was the latter part of 2023, I don't know exactly when. It was the cover that really stood out to me. Don't let anybody tell you that, you know, you don't judge books by their covers, because we all do. So Andrew Pettegree, if you're watching, you've gotten me in twice now with your cover design. So whoever you got in charge of that, don't let him go. I like this book. It wasn't really, the best book of the year or even the past month, but it was definitely interesting. Andrew Pettegree's style is a bit dry. You can't blame him. I mean, he writes about books, and unless you're really really into books, libraries and the history of books, it might come across as boring. I certainly found an interest in it, but I know for broad appeal, maybe it doesn't quite have that. Although I see that it's being promoted quite a bit, and it may even attain some sort of bestseller status for 2024 in its category. That's certainly possible. I think that his last book, called The Library, did fairly well commercially. It's not too terribly long. It's long enough, I guess, for the topic. You're looking at about 450 pages after the endnotes, I would say. Yeah, 455. So it's also very well illustrated. You got some really devastating pictures in there. There's one in particular. I can't remember which library this was, but it showed it after a bombing campaign during World War II. And you see these people, obviously it was a staged photo op, but the building had no ceiling. It was blown right off, but all of the books were still largely intact. The ground was all messed up with books everywhere and bookcases on the ground. But you look at these men; they're actually pulling books off of the bookcase, and they were still largely intact. So that was kind of haunting, you know what I mean? Also, there's lots of sort of trivial type details in here. It talks about something that I found personally interesting was how big of a reader Joseph Stalin was. That was for someone who is largely presented as being an extremely bestial and bestialized type of a person. He was kind of underestimated for what he knew and how well read he was. Of course, that doesn't take away from his deplorable track record and the murders that he's responsible for. But I did find that interesting. Also, it kind of related to something I had read recently in a book on Cuba by Ada Ferrer, where she was saying Fidel Castro, who has definitely, he's not in the category of Joseph Stalin, let's be honest, but not exactly lionized by the West. But how well read he was, and I think it's important trivial details like that to know that, to learn about that, to realize that even though some of these people were monsters, there was kind of a bit of evil genius going on at the same time. So I would say, very well illustrated. He's got a lot of historical images and documents that he shows. This is actually a historical image. I wanted to read you a bit of the flap here, just a paragraph. It says, "In the book At War, historian Andrew Pettegree explores the powerful and contradictory roles the written word has played in warfare. Uncle Tom's Cabin exasperated tensions between North and South in the years before the Civil War. Winston Churchill used a travel guide to plan the invasion of Norway, while libraries set up in the London Underground provided comfort to Brits sheltering from German bombs. And during the Cold War, communists and capitalists alike used books to spread their visions of how the world should be run." So, we think of ideas being sort of stillbirth. They don't really have any potency in the real world, and he's taking it from the other end. Of course, this is the greatest argument for pretty broad free speech, right? Is they're just ideas, they're not weapons. And he shows some more of that complexity where, there's not quite the division that um, people tend to draw between word and action. Something that is descriptive and something that is performative. As they would say in legal philosophy. So it does sort of point to that. I would say a very similar work that explores this was Robert Darnton. Censors at Work was the name of the book. I don't think it was too terribly commercially successful, but he tackles sort of this idea of, what role do states play in publishing books? Even in ostensibly very free societies, free and open societies, what role does the state have to play? And the answer to that is quite complicated. It wasn't just in East Germany that, you had to go through a whole bunch of censors and the nomenclature to get your vision or even your fiction across to the broad public. And although, of course, it's very dangerous territory when you start censoring on that level, it does have its place. Again, we're not talking about East Germany. We're talking, in open societies. Yeah, the state and gatekeepers and publishers, they all have a role to play. And sometimes that censorship, that input can create better literature. And that is an almost heretical statement to make in this day and age because of how free speech has been weaponized so much, especially by the right. Pardon me, that's to my observation. You also get a sense of the time lapse that we're the era that he's focusing in on, because with his previous book, which I'll talk about in a few days, his previous book was basically from the Renaissance into the modern era, and in fact this overlaps what he's saying in that book quite a lot. I would say the last third of his previous book is really an extension of that, if you will. But the era that he's focusing on mainly here, as he mentioned through these few works that I just read to you, is basically from the Civil War, leading up to the Civil War, to the fall of the Soviet Union in '89, and everything in between. So you've got a broad, over 100 years there that he's focusing on, and basically covers anything that you can think of relating to books and their place in war. So you get to learn, like, what were people's reading tastes on the battlefield? What kind of books were people talking about? What kind of books were the women reading at home, who were tending to the farm and tending to domestic type concerns? What were they interested in? What were the publishers like? You also see the rise of the Penguin paperback and the cost discrepancies involved with that. How public libraries were funded. You also see on the censorship side of things, how Germany, actually not just Germany, although this is probably the greatest example of how, belligerents in war, often libraries are the first things that they attack, because that's not just the source of your ideology for a society, that's your history. Look at what's going on in Gaza right now. I always bring things back right now to the Palestinians because I have so much sympathy for what they're going through. And the targeting of places that are apt to hold, the kind of the foundational documents of these people. That's nothing new in war. That is as old as war, really. And so you really see in the German instance through World War II, how some of Hitler's worst victims, such as Poland, suffered and really continue to suffer to this day over the destruction and the loss that they felt during World War II. In fact, there's still debate in modern times about how to divvy up some of these books that they haven't even cataloged, because there's so much of it. Even though we're just talking about books, you know, it really can, some of these anecdotes pull at the heartstrings. There's also another sort of trivial thing I wanted to mention, more of just a humorous thing that I loved. So here in the West, you know, we talk a lot about how Germany, you know, burnt, they had their ritual book burnings, right? Especially of Jewish works and basically anything that didn't conform to their ideology. It also draws some of the paradox of how, you know, in World War I, the West had a few book burnings of their own. You know, perhaps it wasn't to the same degree, and I'm not trying to draw any moral equivalencies here, although there are some to be made. But, you know, it shows you that this is an all too human aspect of conflict. This is what we come after. It's one of the main things we come after, how people think. And don't kid yourself, we are seeing it today, even in, you know, the wonderfully beautiful and free United States of America, in Florida in particular, with the utterly psychotic right-wing governments that they've seen in recent years, and their stifling of free speech and publication. You know, it's a prescient thing to be discussing in this day and age. You know, I don't think there'll ever be a time where, you know, books won't be targeted in that way. But anyway, the sort of the humorous side that I keep sort of leading up to is back in World War I, when we were doing the book burnings, you know, here in the West, they even went so far as to change the language. Like, you know how when Russia invaded Ukraine just recently, how many French restaurants were taking the word poutine out because it sounded too much like Putin. You know, they'd rename it. Well, something similar sort of happened back in World War I, where, you know, you wouldn't refer to it as, you know, bratwurst. You would call it Liberty sausage. You know, it was more patriotic to call it Liberty sausage because, after all, everybody likes bratwurst or Frankfurter. So, you know, if you credit that to the Germans, well, it's kind of unpatriotic. Another really funny one that I liked was in referencing sauerkraut. You know, people liked their sauerkraut, especially back then, I guess, and it wasn't patriotic to credit it to the Germans, so they would call it like freedom or liberty cabbage, something like that. So I don't know. I love trivial little things like that, and this book is full of that. So I highly recommend it. Let me know in the comments if you've read this. Let me know if I've convinced you to, and if you have any questions about it. I certainly like talking more about these things, so we'll see you down there. Hey everyone, I hope you liked this video. If you want more like the one you just watched, click the suggested video on this screen. Make sure you subscribe, and to connect with me on my other platforms, my handles are linked below in the description, alright? Take care, peeps. Till next time.